I take refuge until I am enlightened in the Buddhas, the Dharma, and the Sangha. Through the positive potential I create by practicing generosity and the other far-reaching attitudes, may I attain Buddhahood in order to benefit all sentient beings. I take refuge until I am enlightened in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. Through the positive potential I create by practicing generosity and the other far-reaching attitudes, may I attain Buddhahood in order to benefit all sentient beings. I take refuge until I am enlightened in the Buddhas, the Dharma, and the Sangha. Through the positive potential I create by practicing generosity and the other far-reaching attitudes, may I attain Buddhahood in order to benefit all sentient beings. If we happen to encounter any audio issues or technical difficulties via Zoom, please let us know in the chat box, and I'll be checking periodically to see if everything's okay, and we'll do our best to help you solve any issues if any arise. And then obviously the chat box, for those of you following us online, the chat box there is the main, I guess you can call it the interaction box, so whatever questions or comments you have, please post there as well. And so as of today, we're on to verse 5. Last week we covered verse 3 briefly, and again, even though we're on to verse 5, any questions or comments or content, anything that you would like to bring up as part of the discussion from the previous verses, then please feel free to do so as well. We started, or we continued continued with these Wednesday classes at the end of October. So any material that we've covered from the beginning of the text until now, if there's anything you would like to ask about or would like to discuss, please feel free to raise those topics as well. But last week we were going through the concepts explained in verse 3, which covered death and impermanence, and then also important concepts or aspects endpoints in relation to, or related to karma. And so keep that in mind, and again, if anything arises from the previous chapter, feel free to bring it up. But if we can all turn to page 30 in the text, you'll see there at the top is verse 4 and the verse 5. We'll read the two root verses, or the root stanzas, together. And then after that, please feel free to ask questions, and we'll be engaging in further discussion. So please read along with us from the root verse 4. With this firm conviction, abandoning even the smallest non-virtue, and engaging in every virtuous deed, bless me to always live conscientiously. Verse 5, samsaric splendors are never satisfying. They are unreliable and the door to all misery. Seeing these faults, for the joy of nirvana, bless me to generate intense enthusiasm. So, if we look at verse 4, here on page 30, it's mentioned together with verse 5. However, if you look at the lines and what's being explained there and what's being shared there, is meant to, it's kind of an extension of verse 3, even though in the text it's mentioned along with verse 5. So we can, if you're able to kind of remind yourself of what of the concepts that were explained in verse 3, you can look at verse 4 now, and then kind of combine together with the concept of death and permanence, and then those particular points of karma. But in terms of the commentary, starting on page 30, it's of the stanza in verse 5. So we hope you had the opportunity to read the commentary on verse 5, the couple of pages there. And then the main points are mentioned through subtitles there. The first one is the 6 faults of samsara, and then the second one is the mind of renunciation. Taji, goma zungana tuwash lessas. I was just mentioning to Geshe Shamba that before we started the session today, we already had a question come in. Thank you very much for that. I'll go ahead and read the question online. And then for those of you who are here in person, I have the traveling mic be passed around. But the question is, what do you think Geshe had in mind when he referenced, quote unquote, we can prove Buddha nature with the lowest form of logic and reasoning? What would that look like to you from a Tibetan Geshe perspective? I think this was in either last week or the previous week's commentary, and this is something that Geshe and I had discussed to try to make sure we were our understanding, and this has to do with the question as well. What would that look like to you from a Tibetan Geshe perspective? And so our understanding in our minds of the concept of versus the terminology that was used specifically here in the commentary when it mentions the lowest form of logic and reasoning. And so when Geshe Shamba and I were discussing it, I think it can be best explained in this way. I think what's being mentioned or what's being referenced here in terms of the lowest form of logic and reasoning, is basically inference or reasoning, logic and reasoning itself. When we talk about phenomena, we categorize them into three types. Ngonju is the first one, and that can be basically understood as phenomena that can be directly realized or understood or conceptualized. And that's kind of the lowest, or not the lowest, but the most grossest form of comprehension there. And then above that is phenomena that is understood or realized through logic and reasoning or through inference. And that's Jungsi Guoyu. So Ngonju means, I guess, a directly perceived and realized phenomenon, and that can be understood through the aspect of it kind of being a gross, like in front of us. You don't have to make a lot of effort to, this mic, I can see that it's a mic, right? I don't have to like go through my memory and use inference to realize that it's a mic. So that can be, I guess, called the most gross form of phenomenon. And then within Guoyu, there's two types. There's Jungsi Guoyu and then Shundu Guoyu. Jungsi Guoyu means low. So I think that's where Jungsi means a little, right? So I think that's what was being expressed here in the commentary when the term lowest form of logic and reason, basically like the small one. So Jungsi means small or little, and so Jungsi Guoyu means phenomenon that's a little bit more difficult to perceive than whatever is perceived or realized directly. So you would have to use logic and reasoning or inference to recognize that. And then that's something that we can do. Obviously, there's different phenomena that we use upon. I mean, even when it comes to emptiness, there is indirect realization of emptiness, based on the application of inference or logic and reasoning. And then the final type of phenomena is called Shundu Guoyu, which is very much difficult to understand, I guess. There is like little Jungsi. Shundu means like the opposite, like very, very significantly difficult to understand. And that our inference isn't enough. Shundu Guoyu, this kind of phenomenon can only be realized and perceived or properly understood by the Buddhas. Hence, very, significantly difficult, more difficult to understand. So going back to the question here, the lowest form of logic and reasoning, we believe, is a reference to Jungsi Guoyu, and that is phenomena that can be understood through inference or logic and reasoning. So, yes.
What is okay?
Thing is 6 so.
Daluk did the git was not timid.
Other cut it,
Bodon nature is kind of
timid. So that was, I'm sorry, I only got half of the question there. So that was the first. So that's what the reference to lowest form of logic and reasoning is. But then if we apply that to we can prove Buddha nature with the lowest form of logic and reasoning. So, proof
can't chat tourists.
Oh, the 100 tourists. Read Oh.
Readland Tanju will Shijachi. Read later as Kagayaro. And as a Tanju will Shijachi, and reads this and the Ranshani read the Juri, Ranshani read the soul, the Bodan and Sheridan, Ranshani read the Ranshani and Tombanero.
So yes. The Ranshani read the Nane.
That's all cause the Ranshani read. Bodan and Sheridan, the Ranshani read. Ranshani read the Gandus to Tombani. Mazu Tombani in Bakanshil, Mazu Sinjang Juji, Jes in Chunia, the Tremessing Chunia Niera, the Jes in Chunia, so the Mazu Dugora, Arazu Sinjan Susu Juji, Shiviting and Tombani. 두고 티 동반이도 두고 제발라 텐디기 다 부르 제고 다 아주 단도 고총지 구주 다세 단다 아주 그래서 그러나 주네 다양다 지고고 시그라 종생양다 지고고 시라 때 종생양다 때 종생 지난 마고 쇼지라 다 돈이 로지 봐 마고 쇼지라 봐 레바 마고 르디 나니 아니 다슈도 다 타르tuk사로 텐디기 리바드라 티 두고 다 돈이 두고 다 도도데
So if we're to approach this question or this concept from the highest school of thought, or the Prasangika school of thought, what Buddha nature is referencing or alluding to is basically the nature of the mind, or the emptiness of the mind. And so if we can kind of rephrase the question, it would be, how can we prove emptiness of the mind, or emptiness with the lowest form of logic and reasoning? That would be another way to rephrase it, if we're, again, to look at this from the highest school of thought, which is the Prasangika school. So when it comes to using logic and reasoning to prove Buddha nature, or the emptiness of the mind, it can be, there are many different types of logics and reasonings that are used, but one of the most significant ones, most important ones, of course, is the reasoning and logic of interdependence. So it can be understood through dependent arising. Dependent arising, yes. Just trying to make sure I have the right translation there. Dependent arising, the reason, or based on the logic of the concept of dependent arising. Yes. So yes, we can prove Buddha nature with the lowest form of logic and reasoning. What would that look like from Tibetan Geshe? So yeah, so from a Tibetan Geshe perspective, in accordance with the texts, that's how it would be looked at. That's how this question would be looked at, and that's how it would be understood in terms of Buddha nature.
So the lowest form of reasoning, logic and reasoning, is to prove emptiness?
So what I was explaining initially was how to understand lowest form of reasoning and logic. Right. So basically, yes. Yes. So basically, yes. So another way, yes. Right. So another way, basically, I guess in other words, emptiness can be realized or can be understood using logic and reasoning, even. I think.
There's no lowest and highest logic. Basically, the other one is not logic and reasoning. The one that you refer to is realizing karma, for example, which only Buddhists. That's not logic. It cannot be proven.
Right. So that's
But there is only one form of logic and reasoning. There is no lowest and highest.
Right. Exactly. So that's why. So that's. Yeah. That's why we were talking about it. And so when we said lowest, we thought that term itself is in alignment with Jungse, which means little or small, and so we started thinking about it in the categories of phenomena. But again, that's just half of the question. The actual question was
manifest, hidden, and deeply hidden phenomena.
Yes.
You need logic and
Right.
reasoning.
Deeply hidden. Hidden, is that the term that we commonly use? Yeah. Okay. So hidden. Yes. Yes.
Deeply hidden, you cannot use.
So deeply hidden, no. That's only yes.
So
That's
there's
the.
only one type of.
Yes.
There's no
Yeah.
lowest and
So
highest.
yeah. So yes. But in reference, if we take that with that concept into the greater question, which is we can prove, or the greater concept of proving Buddha nature through the lowest form of logic and reasoning, Buddha nature ultimately can be understood as the emptiness or the nature of the mind. And so basically a way of rephrasing that concept is we can prove emptiness through logic and reasoning is what we believe is another way of understanding that the execution of that concept there.
엄마 싸우시를 그래서 이제 와한테 스타네요 그랬어. 돈이 루지고 참아되나 여러.
Yeah, so this kind of introduces or gives us the opportunity to, I guess, introduce and remind you all of the greater understanding of emptiness. And so this now looking at the question, it is basically pointed in the direction, and the focus here is emptiness, and what logic and reasoning would be used to understand emptiness. And so, like Geshe was just mentioning that there are many fundamental texts that present many different forms and reasonings on the nature of all phenomena, and the nature of reality, and emptiness. So one of those texts is very critical, and that is Arya Nagarjuna's fundamental wisdom text. And so there, not only that, so obviously there's the text itself, and the related commentaries to that work, and then also the works of the great Chandrakirti, and one of his most well-known compositions, which is
그런 게 이제 오만 유바나 오만 세세인가요?
So Uma Juba is entering the middle way, I believe, right? Like the root text, Uma Juba, right? Entering the middle way, and then Sikse, which is illuminating the illuminating the words on emptiness, right? Clear words, yeah. Thank you. Thanks for helping me out here. And then that is one of Chandrakirti's commentaries on the fundamental wisdom text by Arya Nagarjuna. So, please keep that in mind. Thank you for bringing this up. It really helps focus on the concept of emptiness here. The next question is, and then if anyone has anything to, before we move on to other questions, if anyone has anything they would like to share or to discuss, please feel free to do so. But the next question is, what are the 6 realms of cyclic existence mentioned on page 30 in the fault of not being dependable? So, what are the 6 realms of cyclic existence? Within samsara, we talk about 6 realms of existence, or rebirth. 3 of them are considered lower rebirths, and then 3 of them are considered higher rebirths. Of the lower rebirths, the 3 lower rebirths consist of the hells, the pretas, or what are known as hungry ghosts, and then the animal realms. And then the 3 higher rebirths are, or the 3 higher realms are the realms of human beings, the realms of gods, and then the realms of asuras, or what we call demigods. Yes, so if you happen to see a depiction of what is called the wheel of samsara, or cyclic existence, is called Sibokolo in Tibetan. Those are clearly, and I think it's mentioned here also in the commentary. Sibokolo, yeah, on page 31. So if you can kind of imagine a wheel or a circle, and then the three, like 6 depictions of each of these realms are there. So those are the 6 realms. And then the follow-up question is, or a comment is, something I thought of note and caught my eye on page 32 when discussing samsaric splendors. I love that it's particularly desiring said here, quote unquote, because there are always those who are more deserving, and I feel that's a better view of things. It also helps towards and giving thought to those who are deserving. Okay, so I believe the understanding of that last sentence there is that it helps guide the mind to those who are more deserving. The choice makes it a mess. Ani shodan suni kan ya chambe sikti vegetan na twa desiring na ne right?
Yes.
Let me see what is that at the very top, desiring.
The samsaric splendors, the first paragraph.
What are sometimes there are sensory objects of form. The more we engage with these 5 senses, our desire increases. We did that one?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think that's.
Our desire increases. Okay.
So whoever is reading it's not reading it.
Okay. 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 Yes. Ani chazadinana. Pagi karsho gore. Khobe the ten sharba.
Yes.
Ten ngale tene. Chaba kero sharba.
Yes.
The ten ki jurdilia. Kanji desire lane tos tishasra. Odi avashish tos desire di sik padan le tevina. Ani koran di chikashi gore. Ozu chokshe chegwa di ten to gutus.
Yes.
Sozo le hawa. Sozo tada chik jidi yobata. Chochi chegwa yobata chengdus.
Yes.
소소를 줘나 즉 소소고에를 파주 직던데 마을고에 어딘지 열었어 니 간사로 되니면 아주 소소다다 디디 어딘지 찍들 때는 소중서로 봐 아니 아니 예 지자니 디 찍들 때는 아니 신 제가 아니 즉 신배 예 기সম로 레알 케보두스 아주 찍디 아보두스 아니 좋아하는데 트시스라
되게 뒤가 리셋 됐어요.
Order. Do we have any other current questions?
계속 좋아하나?
Yes, about just any part of the commentary on verse 5. We had a couple things we wanted. We thought we might go. It was a reference to where that term desire was, I think. Oh no, the 6 realms. The 6 realms. It was.
Then part of the second part of the question is what is the fault of not being dependent?
That wasn't particularly part of the question.
Oh,
It's just it says mention of the 6 realms under the fault of not being dependable. What are those? So yes. So feel free to share questions or anything. But there was also certain explanations in the text that we were hoping to share with you to supplement the commentary here. And the explanation and what we want to share here with you, we got from again, the resource text that we mentioned a few weeks ago, we always have it with us here during the session, so if you're interested, please look into it as well. It's Liberation in the Palm of Your Hand, written by the great Pabongka Rinpoche. And in this particular, there's different versions.
I have a question about that.
Uh-huh.
This.
Oh, I see. Okay, good.
Maybe it's the same. But
Okay,
it's on
good.
Page,
Yeah.
the version is on page 334.
Yeah. Give me just a moment, and then maybe right after we kind of run through a brief explanation for everyone, then we'll take your question, Vladimir. Give me just a moment. Okay, I think that might be a little bit better in terms of volume. And then, just a moment. Okay, so, in a little bit more detail, and in addition to what's in the commentary and our text, if we refer to the liberation in the palm of your hand, and in this version, translated by Michael Richards, if you happen to be following it, it's on page 477, under the general sufferings of samsara. So, as mentioned, the six faults that I mentioned in our collective, or in the text that we're all following, on the foundation of all good qualities, those same 6 faults are mentioned here in the liberation in the palm of your hand. And when we look at the first fault, is not being dependable, or as samsara not being dependable. Here in liberation in the palm of your hand, it's translated as the bane of uncertainty. So the bane of uncertainty of samsara, or samsara not being dependable. The same thing there. But one, obviously we've all read, hopefully we've all read the commentary here, but what's mentioned, what we wanted to share and is taught here in reference to the first fault is an example. And when we say not dependable, it's referring to the constant ebb and flows and the ups and downs of samsara. And that is very well illustrated here in a story or an example that's brought up. And it reads, let us take the example of our past and future rebirths. Our enemies, friends, parents, and so forth change places. So that's the reference to not dependable. And it says, or it reads, once a layman's old father always used to eat fish from the pool behind the house. The father died and was reborn as the fish in the pool. The layman's mother was attached to the house, so she was reborn as the man's dog. The man's enemy had been killed for raping the man's wife. And so, because the enemy was so attached to her, he was reborn as her son. The son caught his father, the fish, and killed it. While he ate its meat, the dog, his mother, ate the fish bones, and so was beaten by her son. His own little son, his enemy, was sitting on his knee. Shariputra saw this and said, he eats his father's flesh and hits his mother. The enemy he killed sits on his knee. A wife gnaws her husband's bones. Samsara can be such a farce. And so farcical it is. And many of us have very farcical experiences in our lives, and so we can I think we can all agree and connect to this concept and through our own experience, life experience. But just in case that was confusing, imagine a man, his father, his mother, his wife, his son, and then an enemy. So his father was reborn as a fish for continuously fishing in their pool. His mother, or the man's mother, because of her overwhelming intense attachment to their home or their house, was reborn as a dog that is always, housebound, if you will, or very obedient and housebound. His wife was assaulted by his enemy, and out of spite and revenge, he killed the enemy. But the enemy was reborn or took rebirth as their son. And so imagine the man now, both parents have passed, and one reborn as a dog, the other reborn as a fish. The enemy that he killed for assaulting his wife, now reborn as his son, sitting on his lap. And he caught a fish from the pool. This fish was his father, the very fish that his father was reborn as he caught, and he's eating this fish. And his mother, now the dog beside him, is picking out the bones, and out of dislike for that, he hits the dog, his mom. And then his son, who he's embracing as, such a, his son, his child, of course, was the very enemy that assaulted his wife. And then, yes. So, again, the lack of dependability and the bane of uncertainty can be used in this example. That was one that was very, if you when you imagine it, even as kind of a visual or a scene in your mind, it stood out, and this is one that we wanted to share. Again, in relation to the first fault there. And then if you go down to the fifth fault, which is causes us to continually fluctuate in status. If you turn to page 484, or the explanation on the causes for us to continue to fluctuate in status in the liberation in the palm of your hand. What is mentioned here are called four ends, tashi, four ends of conditioned phenomena. So let me just read the first paragraph here, and then those four ends are brought up. And it reads, so the fifth flaw fault is translated here as the bane of moving from high to low over and over again. So the continual fluctuation. And it reads, from the transmission of the Vinaya, all collections end up running out, the high end up falling, meeting ends in separation, living ends in death. This speaks of the four ends of conditioned phenomena. Collections of wealth and property end up running out. A fall ends our high position. The end of coming together is being separated, and death is the end of a rebirth. Yes, so those were what are called four ends that particularly pertain to conditioned phenomena or impermanent phenomena in samsara. And so we wanted to bring this up to supplement the commentary here and the version that we're reading here together. So yes, wealth and property running out, an eventual end to our high position, or a fall, if you will, from that high position. Coming together, the end of coming together is being separated, and then the end of rebirth is death. So an end to all of these temporal existences or temporal possessions or states that we experience or have here in samsara. So that was in relation to fault number 5. And then, if you turn to page 33, the section under the subtitle, The Mind of Renunciation. So in this portion of the commentary, if you look down at the 3rd paragraph, it says, as Maitreya Buddha states in the Uttara Tantra, to cure an illness, a doctor needs to be able to understand the patient's symptoms and diagnose the condition. Only then can he or she prescribe the appropriate medicine that will eliminate the cause of the illness. So to add a little bit further to that, to what's being explained by Geshe here, is this example of the doctor and the sickness and the prescribed medicine is a reference to understanding, or a metaphor for the Four Noble Truths. Because if you look at the previous paragraph, on paragraph 2, it reads that it mentions that the first teaching, or Geshe mentions that the first teaching that the Buddha gave on the Four Noble Truths was the truth of suffering. So, so if you imagine the suffering being your illness. So let's say there's a medical professional or a doctor looking at you. What they'll try to do first is identify or help you identify the illness, and then they'll look for the cause, which is suffering, the cause of suffering, the second truth. And then after understanding the cause and realizing what the cause is, they'll then examine, and then in most cases understand that there is a means or a state of being relieved of the illness. And so this is a reference to the truth of cessation. And then once they understand that, oh, this particular illness has arisen from this particular cause. This particular cause can be relieved or can be treated. They'll then prescribe you the proper treatment. And so the proper treatment or the type of medicine that is needed is a reference to the truth of the path leading to cessation. So yes, and this is explained in one of the root verses of the Maitreya Buddha's Uttara Tantra. So yes, we wanted to kind of just go into a little bit more detail to kind of make that connection between the 2nd and 3rd paragraphs of the commentary here. So yeah, we wanted to just share those with you as to help maybe things, for help you kind of glue things together and kind of stick things together in a more smooth and maybe things could be a little bit understood a little bit more smoothly there. So that was our intention for sharing that with you. But yes, Vladimir, you said you had a question.
Yeah, on page 334,
Mm-hmm.
in your text of liberation.
Okay. Okay.
There is 334.
Yes.
A paragraph that starts, I think it's indented. See that in the middle?
Uh-huh.
Yeah. So about the Atisha, my translation is different, but my translation reads, when the great Atisha was asked, what result does a person acquire by thinking only of this life? He replied, he acquires a result.
Hello. Oh, sorry. Vladimir, sorry.
Maybe you can read it because my translation is different.
Okay. Well, yeah. I mean, it's good though. It's good for everyone to hear the actual question.
It's basically the same meaning. I looked
Sure,
it up,
sure,
which is
sure. Sorry, I forgot to pass the mic.
Yeah. So the question is about it's in the section of on page 334 of
Okay.
the Liberation in the Palm of Your Hand.
Okay.
In the section of the disadvantages of not recollecting death and impermanence, is the third point. And there is a quote from Atisha. When the great Atisha was asked, what result does a person acquire by thinking only of this life? He replied, he acquires a result right there. And when asked, what does he acquire in the future? He said, he is born in the hells as a hungry ghost or as an animal. And this is the end of the quote. Thus, the result of such actions is that we achieve some small purpose in this life, and in the future we are reborn in the lower states.
Yes.
That's it, yeah.
Yes, I see that section.
Does that mean that even positive actions, is he saying, actually there's a larger quote from, which this is excerpted from, which is earlier, but I don't have that part of
Okay.
it. It's
Okay.
in the,
Okay.
but anyway, so he is implying that even a positive action created while thinking only about this life
Mhm.
will result in some positive result in this life,
Mm-hmm.
but in the future
Mm-hmm.
there will be rebirth in hell and all that. What is the meaning of that?
You mean directly from that, or
Yeah,
you mean?
yeah,
Oh.
directly.
Isn't that what he's saying?
Okay. So I'm just going to read, for the sake of everyone following online, I'm just going to read the answer from Atisha, and it says, ask me what the results of thinking only about this life are, and I will tell you. They are merely the results of this life. Ask me what will happen in your next lives, and I will tell you. You will be reborn in hell as a hungry ghost or an animal. Pagi kongi chiwa ti chiwa ra.
Nas.
Kondu tanda pagi chiwa chambe kaluro.
사 아드샬라야 슈레세.
오, 슈레세, 좋아. Tani.
신도 코나 체마에 있는
오.
가르치라데 대고나 인시세야지.
어디. 어디.
아니 과지로 그랬을 때잖아. 아니 녀와지로 이다지로 들으시로 그랬어요.
어래. 따따스 당와 봐. 아니 세 디samla mine ba. 나 겨와사 추고 와스. 다 디기 갑도 저보디 다 대버 방으로 받아.
네네.
라 세디나. 다 이네 세 디samla 미 보인사 디기 겨와 치물라 두분 두거시. 자기 어르베스. 기고 어르베스.
디코 너래. 노스 코알레야 말해. 신들의 사조의 기와디기 좋아 심말랑에 송치야기 주스 기와디기 치그리시고 말이다. 신들랑 하는 속이다. 신디 지불을 상담한테 말이나. 아니 전에 덴디 신들의 사샤조기 기와 코랑기 좋아 심만 덴디 토야기 주체 도구 말아 와라. 디 주체 도구 매와인자 다 좋아 심만 가지 그러라 봐이나. 다고 녀마사슈지 레다 계시고 말이다. 신들의 저 신디랑 고 코친 주원데 천식이 수수 천대랑래 차대와이나 안처럼 치료도 되잖아 같이 그랬을 때잖아 아니 지와치만도 녀와도 이다도 되는 녀송을 지도 그래서 정상 가르칠 때잖아 저기 천대나로가 사샤죠 기와치기 지와치만이야 저는 든드토야기 기와치 싸움도 와라 가르치려나 지와치만이야 든드토야기 레사वर 제발로 저런 가르치고 그랬을 때잖아 레 this 사고라다 가르쳐 버다. 뭐도 도야기. 뭐도 주네 수팅 레셔면와. 뭐도 주 수팅 나버다 받는데 송고래. 되게 아니가 지금 레전드 간산 로고래. 레전드 세대 추어치만라서 왔다 실 펜셔도 된데 도여로. 더코 단다 신들 삼단데 가르쳐 왔는데 그 신들랑 되어 도야 지동 지 디마도 그 렌디기 마 지와치만라서 왔다 그 상도 코너 코토고야 말. 그래서 뜻 코토고 매와 인상 코 치들잖아. 신들이야 그런 게 지와치마다 덴도 토토야기 레춘의 싸매와 디스 거마도 띵은저 신들의 삼단에 기와치사 기와디기 지와치마 공연 손의 지식을 띵다 말고.
And so,
기와 그런 게 되지.
to clarify, it's meant to be understood, that second portion is meant to be understood as the positive action that you created, focused merely on this life, is not going to bring you a fortunate rebirth in your next, rather than it being understood as it will bring you to an unfortunate rebirth, directly causing an unfortunate rebirth. It's meant to be understood that it won't bring you a fortunate rebirth because of that focus. For that, obviously, you need the understanding, the intention of your actions to go towards what's the translation? The generation of a higher rebirth, right? Human or God, right? So that needs to, in order for that to happen, you can't be focused on this life alone. You have to have that concept and that understanding of that, and that the action leading to that. Any action, even if it's a good one, but on this life, but if it's merely just focused on this life, it won't bring you that rebirth. That's how it's meant to be understood.
Yes,
rather than
yes. That's how I understand it as well. Basically, the point is that positive actions created while thinking only about this life will not result in higher rebirth.
Right.
So,
right.
So
But does that mean that just because it was focused on this life alone, will that good rebirth result in my unfortunate rebirth? That's
no, that's not the case.
Not a direct cause to that.
It's not direct cause. But basically, what will ripen, the implication is that what will ripen is not the result of the positive actions created during this life, but the result of negative actions created.
Yes.
But still, this is very significant. So the positive actions, unless they're generated with, acted upon while thinking about future rebirth, they will not. They're not projecting. They don't have the power to project positive rebirth.
Right. Yes, that's.
So somebody may be extremely altruistic. I mean, perform incredible amount of positive actions, benefiting people, but they don't believe in future rebirth. They don't believe in karma. This will not be, whatever they do will not be a cause for their being rebirth, achieving a human rebirth. That's related to.
가서 정원도 주셔야 돼. 수팅리 셴메라라. 원도 주는 수팅리 셴메스. 수팅 넘버스 나고 송버지 마이는 셴바도 셴더도 그런 뭐뭐 못해셔와는 그 지만 론조 용으로. 제비 론조 팅지 되는 소소소 여러 봐. 제비 론조 팅지 돼. 저빈당된 준비지. 소소소 뭔가 파진 주디 리고 소소소 조드 소소소 여러 봐. 지난 차창으로. 나 그런 러체모 쇼지 도 지메게 주봉 수팅지 야고 송 들으시나?
먼저 모두 함이 고바. 함이 고바서 미 임바 삼르야 먼저 그냥
함이 고바 사도미
미치.
아니 라마이
미 임바 삼르야 먼저 그게 대화
된줄지다. 어디 말해? 된줄 되전주 총알이야 체취 송창으로. 안에 가르쳐 그래. 수팅나버 답이 시송. 안에 파첸 쪽이디 조체. 로젠소 파첸 조체. 멜란트마메 비창저. 디송디 창바 야고지 창바 있는데 뭔가 저 되게 주주성이 르데는 뭐지디 용어로 새로 미 주어장의 단다 파진 제소 파진 쪽이 파진 쪽이 창제 가서 도와줘 봐다 멜란트마메 창제가 그저게 영어 당원도 주는 스팅레션에서 당원도 주들라 수팅 나버다 맞지 뭐다 내가 주는 수팅 이제는 나버다 맞지 뭐라다 제가 선들을 좋아치만 그렇지만 기말랭에 뭐지 주는 수팅 세트들이 싫어 뭐라 가보라.
So, if you remember the previous sessions that covered verse 2, perfect human rebirth. or if we look at that for a second, and this even just look at rebirth and human rebirth in general, is yeah. Yeah. So if we just take the concept of perfect side, and just think about human rebirth just in general, let alone perfect human rebirth, just in general, human rebirth, that's based upon the basis of that, of human rebirth, is morality, right? So ethical discipline, right? And so by morality, we're referring to the discipline of maintaining and practicing avoiding the 10 non-virtues. So if, without the concept of maybe future lives, and without the concept of the 10 avoiding the 10 non-virtues and then adopting the 10, the opposite of the 10 virtuous actions, it would seem difficult to obtain.
It is not a morality.
Yes.
Without that concept.
Without the morality, yes, without that morality, and so that's
It is not a morality, and because of that, it's not a concept, right? If you don't have a concept of future rebirth, avoiding the 10 negativities
right.
does not constitute the practice of morality.
Right, exactly,
so
yeah.
So
that means
it's not a cause for future
right,
human rebirth, right?
Right. Yeah, it would seem a little bit difficult for that to be something. So this is mentioned in Arya Nagarjuna's Precious Garland, and it's mentioned that without morality, or the practice of morality, there is no there's no what's the word? There's no result of the human life.
Yeah, but my question
Or
was
human
here
rebirth.
about what is the practice of morality. We know that, we need morality in order to achieve.
Yeah.
But the point is that if without having a mundane right view,
Right.
believing in future rebirth and
Right.
karma and all, there is no practice of morality.
Right.
So
Right.
so a person who is
Well-
not a Buddhist cannot create the causes
So
for
No.
not for human rebirth.
Yeah.
And even though previously it was mentioned that here it says precious human rebirth, but actually now you're saying it's not only precious human rebirth,
So
but
for
human
precious,
rebirth in general.
there were the three.
Right,
The three causes for precious human. Or for
But that's the
perfect
same
human
for human rebirth as
Yes,
well.
For human rebirth, it doesn't necessarily follow those three.
It
doesn't
doesn't?
have to follow those three. Where, what is it? Well, yes, one of them.
Morality,
not all
you need
of
still
them.
morality.
Not all three. So
Not generosity, maybe not generosity, but you need morality and aspiration.
Yes,
right?
yes,
Yeah.
yes. Certain numbers.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you need perfect morality.
Yeah,
Right?
so that's indispensable even for
Yeah, even
regular
for
human
even just
rebirth.
regular, even
Yeah.
just a normal human rebirth, let alone a perfect human rebirth.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
That first one is, or morality.
Morality. And
is-
since one cannot practice morality without having the right view of
Yeah.
Buddhism, that means that somebody who
and
doesn't believe in karma
Oh.
and rebirth cannot practice morality and cannot create the causes for
Yeah.
future human rebirth, not let alone precious human
Yeah.
rebirth.
지단 쪽 같이 키면은 단다 이 짐이 수리 나버다 보면 상이 잡아요 말아. 대차셔는 것이 되려라. 수수 그 땅이라도 또 땅송라서 수수를 개개면 민것이 된다도 좀 하지 더 가리는 저도 싫어하지. 젬팽 상도 쇼지 젬팽 상도 쇼지 영에 된다도 젬팽 상도 쇼지 와체네 베트신 펜도도 도에 된다 용도. 그래서 티 선들 코로 선들 미유 코로 송고 말아. 선들 미유송 라디선 듣기 쉬워. 수수유 땅년자 안에 넣어놓죠. 안에 토코서 된지기 체도 그 자와 도셔. 것이 된지치는 왜 어찌 젬팽 코나섬 다니들이 되게 좋아지 뭐라. 된다도 좋아하는 용어이죠.
So to answer that question, it doesn't necessarily have to. Morality doesn't necessarily have to be under with that pretense of understanding the Buddhist concepts of, the 10 non-virtuous actions and so on and so forth. It just the being able to achieve a human rebirth itself can be through good actions, virtuous actions in general. For someone who is not a Buddhist, who's never even heard of the 10 virtuous actions, let's just say, a human rebirth is possible. And so when we talk about morality, that can be understood as a more broad kind of umbrella there. It doesn't necessarily have to be within just only the context of our Buddhist concepts. When we talk about the focus or the emphasis on this life, though, let's say that individual that you brought up, great, actions for the sake of the community on grand scales, and they have no concept of any of these Buddhist teachings. These kinds of actions could possibly, yes, lead them to a human rebirth. That would be possible. In terms of, if we take it back to where we're reading about like the focus on this life, though, when we say, the focus on this life,
They are focusing on this life. The example that you just said, right? Somebody's positive
but when we say the focus on this life, what we're referring to is for oneself, like for fame, for wealth, for prosperity, for something to be gained for oneself within the context of only understanding this life. If it's not without that kind of thought, without this kind of self-centered, like I want something from this, I want something to be gained from this action, if it's not motivated by that, if it's as selfless without being under the umbrella of any Buddhist concept as just anyone, and it's a pure selfless act, there's no intention or motivation behind getting something in return, something like that would be considered.
This is very highly hypothetical, really, because all the positive actions, even the most beneficial action somebody can perform, are always motivated. Somebody, especially somebody who is not a Buddhist, are always motivated by some kind of self-concern, along with wanting to benefit others. Of course, it's always so. It's always a mixture. There is no pure, right? For the majority, it's highly unusual. So in a typical case, you would not be thinking of somebody who's so selfless, which it has to be a bodhisattva really to be that selfless. So again, we're going, but basically what you just said is first earlier it was said that according to Atisha, the positive action, that's the way the explanation was given to us. That the positive action of somebody who is thinking about this life, and anybody who's again not aware of the future lives would be thinking only about this life. They may be benefiting people for the sake of reputation or whatnot.
Well, if that's involved, if the sake of, bring it back to the self, like, for my reputation or for my fame or for whatever, again, if that self-centeredness is the motivation, then, it wouldn't result
But it's never alone. There's also the need to benefit, right? What if it's a mixture of these two? It's always a mixture.
아니 지금 넘버 이미 계속 주는 메모지 이게 주고 주는 암조 고만이 지금 주마치
아하 뭐 지금 선례 송에 여러 로
아니 디나올로네다 아니 파기
젠데
자심으세요 여러분 또 신의 자심으세요 라다만 저 주는 요마로 와서 같이 직 셴라 직 야보 인슬라네게 가서 때 간지 미 평월지 간자 평월지 인사비 슈부디 라다 제대 여러 와서 직 가서 랑 직 가서 진지서 삼로셔보다 그게 뭐도 짱짱 소소 주는 맞잖아 코랑이 세 깔아도 슈즈 말을 왜 싸다 알람다 페이지에 전에서 뭐 연구를 하시마도 페이지 가보시러 와서 라나 맞아지 삼로
이제 수술 수천으로 하면 이제 얘는 고치는 뭐야 이런 식으로 그 넘버 인거 아예요.
So we were just talking about whether or not this kind of wish or this kind of aspiration or this kind of individual exists, one that engages in an action that's purely and completely selfless. And Geshe was saying that it's possible. It's probably possible. Yes. I mean, there's
jumping in the river to save her daughter.
Something like that.
Yeah. Of course, it is possible, but these are
so
not
these
typical examples.
But
But my point is that actually, again, earlier you said that the results, according to Atisha, the results that one acquires by thinking only of this life are not positive human rebirth. They're the results that will be experienced in this life, regardless. That's what we were told. Remember, that's what you said. The interpretation of
this
Atisha.
life, with this life.
So what Atisha is saying? Are you saying it's not its interpretation when he says the result? What result does a person acquire by thinking only of this life?
Yes.
So the explanation was even positive action while thinking about this life will not result in positive human rebirth.
So by this life, think of it as a synonym for wanting something back for myself, like a self-centered benefit for myself.
Okay, so that's the interpretation
so
of this.
irrespective of what the action is, let's say if I do something for you, but my intention is that so you give something back to me later. I lend you $5 because I think Vladimir is going to lend me 10 one day. So if it's motivated by that kind of self-centeredness, obviously it's within the context of this life. It's under that umbrella.
Yes, okay.
But not only. All right. So if we step back for a moment and reanalyze this whole portion of this text here, what is meant to be expressed and how it's meant to be understood is that what Atisha is saying is that if you practice the Dharma out of the thought that it'll bring me something good in this life and it'll give me, so obviously you take this up level by level. Okay, well, and then my next is that I'm practicing the Dharma so that the small scope, right? So that I don't fall into the lower realms in my next life, and then I practice the Dharma. If you can even expand on that, I'll practice the Dharma so that I can, achieve liberation, freedom from samsara, and then ultimately I will practice the Dharma because I would like to achieve enlightenment for the sake of all sentient beings. That's where you want to aim. But what's being specifically mentioned here is that if you think that, or you have the motivation that, I'm going to practice the Dharma because it'll bring me some wealth, fame, prosperity, so on and so forth in this life, then that kind of Dharma practice, the result of that kind of practice motivated by this life will not bring you a human rebirth.
Yeah. Well, let alone Dharma practice, any positive action, right? We can say that if a Dharma practice will not result in positive human rebirth, what about
I don't
action?
think any necessarily, not every single raya.
No, but we're talking about Dharma practice.
So yes, as long as it's motivated by this kind of wanting or expectation of something back for oneself, then yeah, whether it be Dharma practice, whether it be just an ordinary act, positive act, it won't be a cause for human rebirth. Because
but practicing Dharma is special with the intention of benefiting in this life. It seems to particularly negative or practicing, like for example, because you're right, in the previous paragraph it says that we also come to regard meditation, mantra recitation, and other Dharma practices as methods for removing the problems of this life. So, just what you said. Really, if you practice with that intention, that's definitely will not.
Okay. Yes.
All right.
Yes. Yes. Thank you. There's a question here. It says on page 28, third paragraph. The second point is karma's multiplying factor. So this is from last week. The second power is karma's multiplying power. Would this multiplying power be studied in the Abhidharma and be concerned with how the mind produces such a multiplying effect? 아니, 가지. 이제 되는 시셔.
아래.
근데 난 니바티. 오, 그런 거. 니바티.
완사카.
피그리스야 그지. 소야 셔봐. 아니 아니 샤도 만데 피그리스야.
아래.
그지 셔봐.
아래.
어디 아니 먼저 죄나 아니 숨기어로 베스 디 남샤 셔봐다.
아래.
아니 되네. 아니 근데 폐하기 먼저 섬르기로 하다 섬르기 깬라 때네 폐외 주부 폐하셔 봐 그런데 아니 전화 숨겨로 베스 단다 니 믹스 니바셔 봐 어디 제시셔 어디 어디 아니 전화 숨겨로 베스 마세베 아니 다 섬르 땡이로다 다 아니 직 여러분들 어딘데 털리야 그래 쇼다 디 숨겨 여러분 with how the mind produces such a multiplying effect. The mind produces like this some other 섬르 can't be right that 섬르 자만해 여러분 기회로 나서 그러다 이게 차거든요 여러분 어딘지 그 아니 직 폐리야 게 슈게 직제 육토리아 제시 든 여러스 전나니야
전나라 전나로 렌디 콜 뭐뭐 요래다 대수 요래요 알레 단다 덴디 장가 세우지셔지 단나가 람-rim 나노라 단다 지글라 니 피그르세 지어로 봐 언데스 시차보들 전나로 시차보들 송셔보들 토마스 단나 람-rim 나 송바 나셔 송 토마스로 왔다 지용 잔레 배워도 요래 단다들 가서 남들랑 잔 하셔들 세우지보들 때문에 토마스
And so to answer your question, yes, karma as a fundamental concept is explained in the Abhidharma. However, when it comes to this particular point, about unpurified karma multiplying, we're not exactly, we can't exactly recall there being elaborate explanations on that in the Abhidharma, particularly when it comes to that concept. But generally, yes, the concept of karma is analyzed and explained in the Abhidharma.
안테로 다른 가서 뒤쪽으로 레니에르 투스마야 펜으로 세야죠. 펜으로 세야데 저 당가서 리바당 거라. 그래서 년생기 차도 제시는 기와 있는 라면 기와 있는 라 고트린 시체와 있는 산이 다집 펜으로요 보다 아니 기와 있는 집을 하다 집 펜으로요 아니 산이 니 잡으래 나니가 니디 시차로요 보다 가서 저 리바통 대로 지난 레든 펜으로요 반저 나와라 된 소용
Yeah, so that concept in general, again, of multiplying, and then again, this applies to both virtuous and non-virtuous karma. The general concept and idea is mentioned in the Abhidharma, but again, how it's particularly explained here in this kind of elaborate fashion in here in the lam-rim text. Is probably not in so much detail in the Abhidharma.
About that,
Yeah.
karma is not a mind, right? Karma is not a mind.
Karma is
The,
not
so
a-
the question was, how does the mind produces the multiplying effect
yeah,
of
you're
karma?
concerned
But
with
karma
how
is
the
not a
mind
mind.
produces such a multiplying.
Nevertheless, mind may be producing karma.
Yes, yes,
But-
exactly.
yeah.
That's what I assumed it to. That's how I interpreted the question. Like
Yes,
the actions
right,
of the
right.
mind, or like
Yeah.
our mental actions.
Yeah.
would-
But does it imply, does it have the multiplying effect on its own?
Yeah,
Or does is
Does
the
it
mind involved in it?
the sharwa.
다티 두스 두셔래 맞아 탄주로라 안에 레레야 action 레레야 맞아디 수체 인캔다 시바잉의 찬이 저 수체잉에도 요요바로와 요요바로 이는데 시바잉의 지 길랭고다 가시기로와 가시기라는 탄주로라 레레 수체잉이 비찹승에 리치요래 아니 디메와체양 가시 탄주로다이나 안에 레레 수체 요요바체 레드레야 네 수체잉이 비찹아요 사마레 시바지 샤우도 되네 란주부들이마이나 레드레야 시바잉 비찰라와라다 좋아 어라 시바잉 비찰라와라 안에 지라고로 당 탄주로니라 레드소 진샤와다 안 탄주로 당서 나지 쯧버져 와다 레드소 진이 차고도 샤고도 세죠와 레드소 진 킬랭고요래 레드소 진이 차마차디 도저로 제와다 인델리 지미 조소 진이 먹고 있어도 지다 우리 바다나는 와 시바지 란주부 나지 시바지에 요초로 가지
단도디 답변은 이 레셔로다. 사셔도 그때 중대 중으로 와.
네네
두부스 방으로 와.
네
또 이제 거기 믹스 페라. 아니 이게 돈에 믹스냐? 디 슈게 두기어 베스. 페라 여러. 이게 참았던 순서들이 그런 슈게 와. 근데 냠들 거라 순이 바셔 와.
라소니 바드 젤슈가
라.
단도 버르티지 순서
And so it's interesting that you brought up whether or not the karma is a consciousness or a mind. Depending on the school of thought, some accept that karma can be understood as both form and mind or consciousness. And then some schools of thought also accept that. And other schools of thought accept that it's only a mind, right? I think the Savatantrika school accepts that the karma is just surely mind, but the Sautrantika and the Prasangika schools accept karma as form, and then in the Prasangika schools, it becomes a topic of debate, where the question is asked, is all karma a form? And is sometimes a certain aspect of that debate would be someone trying to prove that all karma is form or has a form. And so Yashama wanted to share that, just to kind of give us an idea of how to identify karma as within the categories of phenomena.
아니 레사야들 페마베다 싱 쇼진 테그로 세야데 데로 베나 쇼진 테요 요레 디오라 아주 레지 사바이나 정문 조송 참아 참치는 봐 조화칼이야 그러네 레 담이고 차와 지체고 요나로 아메게 레지 사고 베나 도르세 바로지 마이나 아니 고 도르세야게 관론디 제 되는 거지 된데 세 차위 제레 디가네 아니 베지 가와노 단 리슨 상상로 단 시에바 있는 정원 조선 차선 총제데 데소트리트 톱치아에 서마 나들이 많이 오지 다 코치 상무당데 전다지 마세 카메라 토체 아니 코치 사고 보다 그런 시도로 오지 와다들이 돈에 다 코치 마세 카메라 토신데 지데 되는데 아니 세 차네 하고 저번에 된데 제가 있는 된데 레데 슈충아요 와다 된데 제가 요서라 아니 개와 있는 지오지 않았다. 정원 조선 차상 상황 개와 제가 있는 개와 떡치아요. 그래서 모두가 저번에 지피고 있는 가능성 뭐 쉬우지게 뭐지 그런데 가와고 탈 차네 딜레야 지소이랑 도스 제체와 있나 인텔리전 떡치한 거야. 근데 가는지 뭐하다 참아 제신이 와 있는 인텔리전 떡치한 거야. 어떤데 제가요.
So the second part of the question, how the mind produces a multiplying effect in reference to karma. This can be understood by the different levels or different intensities of karma. If we use the example of, let's say, when we talk about karma, we talk about three phases of an action, and that is the initial motivation, the action itself, and then what do we call it? The conclusion. Yes, is that the yes? So like the final part of the, or like the final, yes, the conclusion of the act that would make it, that would categorize it as a complete action. And so there's a beginning, an actual middle, or the actual action itself, and then an end to that action. And so let's say all three were fulfilled, be this a positive action or a negative action. Let's just say, for example, a negative action. Let's say the act of killing someone. If you had the motivation, obviously a negative motivation to kill, you actually killed, and then you engaged in the killing, and the person died, and so that's the completion of the action. And then not only did you kill the individual, but you rejoiced and found joy and satisfaction in that action. That would categorize it as a significant act and the resulting significant karma. And so let's say you continue to the mind kind of having that role of, I guess you could call it, of intensity, and then even multiplying. Let's say you keep doing that. Let's say you keep rejoicing, per se. That it would kind of keep multiplying in that way, is one way to look at it. But versus, let's say, if you just a gross example here. Let's say you didn't want to kill, but you just had to, for some greater reason. Let's say you had to kill an animal to save, example, whatever it was, that it didn't fulfill those three beginning actual act and then concluding parts of that action, and then you weren't rejoicing and continuing with a sense of satisfaction after having completed that action. Then the imprint and then the intensity of that action and the resulting karma would be lower. And so if we kind of use that as a to how to understand the different intensities and then the role the mind has to play, it can be looked the mind producing that kind of act and the mind having a role in the multiplication and the effect can be seen and understood in that kind of way.
대신도 기위 자와 가르치 내 가르치 사와 있는 용어 주선 참아 야구지 정말에는 뒤부터 치가 야구여서로.
And so the same applies to virtuous karma as well. So having a good motivation, a virtuous motivation, actually executing the positive action, and then the conclusion, and then rejoicing that with one's actions. It goes both ways. So I have one final question for today's session, and it reads, when His Holiness the Dalai Lama prays, "As long as space endures and sentient beings remain, may I too abide to dispel the misery of the world / samsara." Does that capture the flavor of renunciation? 아니 뒤직지 뒤로 직지 뒤기던다 셔로 아니 녜중기 또도 녜중 된 거를 뵀어 직지 뒤
지세 나가네 뭐든
도지는 같이 나오는 도지는 디즈다는 도지는 소스라 디 주조 직지 뒤기던다 조로데 아니 녜중 된 거를 뵀어 녜중 송 거를 뵀어
되게 녜중 조상만 인gen용 지난 때죠. 대조로 되더라. 아니 장주심이 자시지 줘발라 란도 된 거를 간신 배 신체 탐주 지세 나갔네 보던 로아지세 니전 대세단 니전 로이지 동안 세월을 쇼송과 공기 지연된 랍청 쇼지 도구인스 장주심이 줘봐선 걸 다조로 보더라. 장주심마도 쓰던 베트그런 신chen tangju 아니 코인인들 네와 디체지 아니 코라라 셰티나 니chen jen 단도 인세 들어와 이제 저 자세지 줘봤어
So does these lines, do they capture the flavor of renunciation? What's being emphasized in this stanza, or these lines, is bodhicitta and the conduct of bodhisattvas, wishing to remain as long as space endures, which for the sake of all sentient beings, and to dispel them of their misery and lead them to enlightenment and freedom. That's what's being emphasized. So bodhicitta and bodhisattva conduct, rather than renunciation specifically. Yes, and so the conduct and the practices of the bodhisattvas. So it is 9 o'clock. Is there any last comments or anything that anyone has? If not, we'll go ahead and do our dedication and then end the session for tonight. Okay. Is that it?
Yes.
So as always, we'll rejoice and dedicate in our positive merit and imprints that we've accumulated here together today. Please turn to page 69 in the text and recite the dedication of merit along with us. Let us dedicate our positive energy to the flourishing of Buddha Dharma throughout the world. Let us dedicate our positive energy to the long life of His Holiness the Dalai Lama. May his sacred mandalas of body, speech, and mind be unharmed by negative intentions and actions. May he and other great masters be successful in fulfilling their dreams and visions for benefiting all sentient beings. Let us dedicate our positive energy to all spiritual communities throughout the world so that they may flourish in their study, contemplation, and meditation. Let us dedicate our positive energy to the elimination of the problems in our world, such as famine, war, and conflict. May everyone in this and other world systems experience peace, happiness, and harmony. Let us dedicate our positive energy to ourselves and to other Dharma practitioners so that we may overcome all obstacles to spiritual development. Let us dedicate our positive energy to ourselves and to all sentient beings so that we can purify the obscurations to liberation and omniscience and quickly reach full enlightenment.